The moment I understood what Dieter Vogel was saying about my grandson, I had to make a decision that would test every instinct I'd spent 40 years trying to keep quiet. The man was standing less than 10 feet from me, speaking in a language he assumed not a single person at that resort could follow, and he was laying out exactly how he planned to destroy the career of the most important young man in my life. I kept my face neutral. I picked up my coffee cup. I listened to every word. That's the thing about training. You don't forget it. Even after 3 decades of pulling wire and running conduit and spending your days with your hands inside junction boxes, the instincts stay sharp. They live in a place deeper than memory. My grandson had no idea the man shaking his hand and calling him one of our brightest was also, in the same breath, describing him in German as a problem to be eliminated before the quarter ended. My name is Walter, and I'm 70 years old. Most people who know me see a retired electrician from Binghamton, New York, a widower who keeps a vegetable garden in the summer, watches too much college football in the fall, and spends Sunday mornings in the third pew from the back at First Presbyterian. They know I'm the grandfather who drives 4 hours round trip to watch my grandson's company softball games. They know I make a respectable pot of chili and that I replaced every outlet in my neighbor Donna's house for free after her husband passed. What they don't know is what I did before the electrical work. From 1974 to 1989, I served in the United States Army as a signal intelligence analyst and linguist. I was stationed primarily in West Germany, first at a base outside Frankfurt, then at a facility near the East German border that I still don't discuss in specific terms, even now. I speak German the way a Berliner speaks it, with the rhythm and the idiom and the particular cadence that textbooks don't teach you. I also speak Russian, though that's a longer story. Those 15 years gave me skills I never particularly advertised and never particularly forgot. When I came home, my wife, Eleanor, was waiting. We'd been married just before my first deployment, young and certain the way only people in their early 20s can be. She'd spent my years overseas, raising our son on her own, working as a school librarian, writing me letters that I kept in a shoebox that I still have in the closet. When I came back for good, I wanted a life that was quiet and solid and entirely ordinary. Electrical work gave me that. You show up, you do the job correctly. You go home. Nobody asks what you used to do. Eleanor passed 5 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. I sat by her bed every night in those last weeks, and we talked about everything we hadn't gotten around to talking about in 46 years of marriage. I told her things about the work overseas that I'd never told anyone. She held my hand and listened and said, "Walter, I always knew there was more to you than you let on." Then she laughed, which made me cry, which made her laugh harder, and that was Eleanor. My grandson Marcus is 26. He has his grandmother's eyes and his father's stubbornness and a mind for systems engineering that genuinely impresses me. And I'm not a man who impresses easily. He's been with Meridian Technical Solutions for 3 years now, working in their infrastructure division, building out data architecture for mid-sized manufacturing clients. It's the kind of work I don't entirely understand, but I nod along to convincingly, which he appreciates. About 8 months ago, Meridian brought in a new Senior Vice President of Business Development, Dieter Vogel, transferred from their European operations. German-born, educated at the University of Munich and later at Northwestern. 52 years old, the kind of handsome that comes from money and attention. Marcus called me the night after Vogel's first all-hands meeting, excited in a way I hadn't heard from him in a while. "Grandpa, this guy is legitimately brilliant," he said. "He rebuilt 3 divisions in Europe. He speaks 4 languages. He's talking about expanding our client base into the manufacturing corridor in Ohio and Indiana. Exactly the kind of infrastructure work I've been developing. If I can get in front of him with my proposal, I think this could be the moment." I was happy for him. I was also paying attention to the small tightness in my chest that I've learned over the years means something isn't adding up yet. I didn't say that to Marcus. I said, "Do good work, document everything, and let the results speak." He said, "You always say that." I said, "That's because it's always true." 6 weeks later, he called again, less excited this time. Dieter Vogel had reviewed Marcus's proposal for the Ohio manufacturing corridor expansion and called it promising but preliminary. He'd asked Marcus to share all his research files so the broader team could contribute. Marcus had done it, because Marcus is trusting and hardworking and genuinely believes that good work gets rewarded. Then, 2 weeks after that, a colleague named Preston, who had been with the company for 18 months and had never shown particular interest in infrastructure development, presented an almost identical proposal to the executive team, with Vogel facilitating. Marcus hadn't been invited to that meeting. I prayed about this the way I've prayed about most hard things since Eleanor died. Sitting in my kitchen after midnight, the house quiet around me, her photograph on the counter where I can see it from my chair. Lord, I said, I don't know what's happening here, but Marcus works hard, and he's a good young man, and I'm asking you to show me what I'm supposed to see. I'm asking you to put me where I need to be. 2 weeks after that prayer, Marcus called with an invitation that caught me completely off guard. Grandpa, Vogel is organizing a team-building weekend, a resort up in the Catskills. He wants to bring the whole infrastructure division and their families for a long weekend. Says it's about building connections beyond the office. Marcus paused. He specifically asked if I had family in the area. I mentioned you. He said you should come. Would you want to? I know it's not really your kind of thing. My kind of thing. Marcus is too polite to say what he means, which is that rustic resorts and company retreats are not typically where retired electricians from Binghamton spend their weekends. But this was my grandson asking, and something I'll call it the same instinct that used to keep me alive in facilities near the East German border told me clearly, you need to be in that room. Book me a room, I told him. I'll be there. The resort was 2 hours from my house, a converted estate in the hills outside Woodstock. The kind of place with stone fireplaces and exposed timber, and a dining room that looks like a painting of what a dining room should look like. Marcus met me in the parking lot when I arrived Friday evening, hugged me, and said I looked good. I told him he looked tired. He said he'd been working 60-hour weeks trying to rebuild his proposal after Preston's presentation had incorporated most of his original data. How are you holding up? I asked. Honestly, I'm frustrated, but Vogel keeps telling me my time is coming, that he sees real potential in me, that this weekend is going to be a chance for me to show the whole leadership team what I'm capable of. He shook his head slightly. I want to believe him. I looked at my grandson's face, 26 years old, still carrying enough optimism to hope that the man taking credit for his work was doing it accidentally. Keep believing in your work, I said, carefully. Just keep copies of everything. Every email, every draft, every timestamp. The first evening was pleasant enough on the surface. About 20 people around a long table in the main dining room. Good food, open bar, the kind of forced warmth that happens when a company pays for people to enjoy themselves. Dieter Vogel sat at the center of the table, which wasn't surprising because Dieter Vogel was clearly a man who arranged himself at centers of things. He was exactly what Marcus had described, polished, confident, with a particular brand of charm that functions like a tool, deployed precisely and withdrawn just as quickly. He shook my hand with both of his when Marcus introduced us. Walter, what a pleasure. Marcus speaks about you with real affection. His English was excellent, accented in a way that most Americans find sophisticated. He tells me you were an electrician for many years. Honest, skilled work. We need more people who actually know how to build things. There it was, the same move as always. The compliment that contains its own condescension. The implication that skilled tradespeople are different from, and implicitly less than, the people sitting in glass offices, managing other people's work. I've been on the receiving end of that particular tone enough times to recognize it in any language. 40 years of it, I said pleasantly. You learn a lot about how things are actually connected when you spend enough time inside the walls. He smiled and moved on to the next conversation. Marcus didn't catch the exchange. I let it go. Dinner conversation was easy. Vogel told stories about his time in Munich, about transforming a struggling division, about his philosophy of talent development. He was funny. He was charming. He asked thoughtful questions and appeared to listen to the answers. I watched Marcus watching him with the particular expression of a young man who wants very badly to believe that his mentor is who he seems to be. It sat in my chest like a stone. The thing I've noticed in all the years since the army is that truly dangerous people are almost always enjoyable company. Unpleasant people announce themselves. The ones who do real damage have learned to be likable. Dieter Vogel was extremely likable. Around 9 o'clock, he excused himself from the table. "Phone call?" he said, with an apologetic smile. "Berlin doesn't care what time it is in New York." He stepped out through a side door that opened onto a covered porch running along the east side of the building. I waited 30 seconds, then stood and said I needed some fresh air. Marcus looked up. "You okay, Grandpa?" "Fine," I said. "Just need to stretch my legs." The porch was lit by string lights and cold with early November. I came out a different door than Vogel had used, which put me at the far end of the porch, in the shadow beyond the light. Vogel was standing, perhaps 40 feet away, with his back mostly toward me, phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking German, fast, colloquial German, the kind you speak when you're certain no one around you can follow it. And this is where 40 years of keeping quiet about the army either serves you or it doesn't. I stood very still and I listened. He was speaking with someone he called Klaus. The tone was completely different from the dining room voice. No warmth, no performance, just the clipped efficiency of a man conducting business he doesn't want anyone to understand. He said that the weekend was going well, that the team was responding to him, that Marcus specifically was cooperative, and had already provided everything they needed for the Q1 presentation. Then he said something that made my jaw tighten. "Marcus doesn't understand what's being built here," he said. "He thinks he's developing his own proposal. He doesn't realize that everything he's submitted has already been incorporated into the corporate presentation that goes to the board in January. The work is good. The boy is actually quite talented, which makes it easier. Talented people produce better material to work with. But he's naive. He still believes in fairness." Klaus said something I couldn't catch. Vogel laughed. Not the dining room laugh, a different one, shorter and colder. He said that by February, Marcus would be on a performance improvement plan. He'd already begun documenting concerns. Work quality, he said. Initiative. A few things that could be read either way, depending on who's doing the reading. By spring, they could let him go with cause. And the proposal, Marcus's proposal, 18 months of Marcus's work would be cleanly absorbed into the company's strategic plan with no inconvenient questions about its origins. He said, "He's a good kid, but good kids don't understand that the game was decided before they walked in the room." Then he switched topics entirely and began discussing a client meeting in Cincinnati. I pressed myself against the wall in the dark and breathed steadily and thought about Eleanor, about the shoebox of letters, about 15 years of training myself not to react to information until I'd had time to process it properly. I went back inside before Vogel finished his call. I sat back down beside Marcus and listened to him talk about his plans for the weekend, about a presentation slot Vogel had promised him on Sunday morning, about how he thought this retreat might finally be the moment things shifted. I nodded along and asked questions and said encouraging things, and inside I was doing something else entirely. I excused myself early that night, told Marcus I was tired from the drive, which wasn't entirely false. I went to my room on the second floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked out the window at the dark hillside. Eleanor always said I was too quiet in moments of crisis, that I went somewhere inside myself that she couldn't reach until I came back out with a decision already made. She wasn't wrong. It was a quality that served me well overseas and drove her fairly crazy at home. I prayed for a long time that night. Not the short asking prayers, the real kind, where you sit with it and wait. Lord, you put me on that porch at that exact moment. You had me here this weekend. I know what I heard and I know what it means. I'm asking for clarity about what you want me to do with it. I'm asking for wisdom, because anger doesn't help Marcus. Justice does. I sat in the quiet of that room and slowly, the same way it always used to happen when I was working through a problem overseas, the shape of a plan began to emerge. I had heard the call, but I hadn't recorded it. That was the piece that was missing. What I had was testimony, an old man's word against a senior vice president with a spotless record and the company's confidence. I needed something more than my account of a conversation in a language I had no obvious business understanding. In the morning, I called my oldest friend from the Army, Frank DeLuca, who went from military intelligence into private corporate security and has spent the last 20 years advising companies on exactly the kinds of problems I was looking at. I stepped outside into the cold and walked the gravel path behind the resort while we talked. Legally, Frank said, when I'd explained the situation, New York is a one-party consent state. You can record a conversation you're party to, or if you're present and a party to the conversation in a nearby space. The thing you need to establish is that you were present and party to the environment, not that you were secretly surveilling him. What does that mean practically? It means don't hide, don't conceal yourself. Be in the space legitimately. If he's speaking in a language he assumes you don't understand, that's his problem, not yours. I asked him what I'd need. He told me. Then he said, "Walter, be careful. This isn't signals work anymore. You're not protected the way you were then." "I know," I said, "but neither is Marcus." Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do it right. Get clean evidence. Go straight to the top. And don't give them a reason to make it about you instead of him." The recording device Frank described was available at a small electronics store 40 minutes from the resort. I told Marcus I wanted to drive into town for the morning, see a little of the area. He offered to come. I told him I'd enjoy the solo time and to focus on preparing his Sunday presentation. He looked grateful and guilty at the same time, the way good young people do when they're being helped by someone older and don't want to impose. I drove to the store, purchased what I needed, and drove back. I had it charged and tested by noon. Saturday afternoon, the retreat schedule included a group activity, a guided hike through the property's back acreage. Most of the team went. I declined, told Marcus my knees weren't up to the terrain, which is true enough that it wasn't a lie. Vogel also stayed behind, which I'd suspected he might. Men like Vogel attend group activities selectively. I found a chair in the main hall near the fireplace, the kind of large, comfortable chair that becomes invisible because it looks like it belongs there. I had a book. I looked like an old man reading beside a fire. At around 2 in the afternoon, Vogel came through the hall on his phone again. This time he settled into the adjoining study, door left partially open, speaking German in the particular lowered tone of a man who believes he's alone. I turned a page of my book and listened. This call was different from Friday nights. This one was business in a way that sent a different kind of chill through me. He was speaking with someone about a competitor's internal product roadmap details that were specific enough and accurate enough that they could not have come from public sources. He referenced documents, referenced specific internal timelines. He referenced a contact at a firm I recognized from Marcus's description of Meridian's primary competitor. He wasn't just stealing from employees. He was using information gathered from within Meridian to benefit people on the outside. That was a different category of problem entirely. I turned another page of my book. My hands were steady. 40 years of practice. When he finished and left the study, I sat for a moment longer. Then I closed the book and looked at Eleanor's face in my memory, the way I always do when I need to be certain about something. She'd look at me calmly and say, "You know what you need to do. You've always known. Now go do it." That evening at dinner, I watched Dieter Vogel work the room and thought about how long he'd been doing this, how many Marcus figures there had been before, how many of them had ended up on performance improvement plans in the spring, confused and doubting themselves, while someone else's presentation was lauded in a boardroom. Marcus sat beside me at dinner, animated and hopeful, talking about his Sunday presentation. "Vogel gave me 20 minutes, he said. "I'm going to lay out the full framework for the Ohio corridor expansion. The real version, the complete one, if the leadership team sees it properly presented. Before Sunday," I said quietly, "I need you to listen to something." He looked at me. Something in my face must have changed, because his expression shifted from excitement to concern in the span of a second. "Grandpa? Not here. Come to my room after dinner." He came at 9 o'clock, closing the door behind him. I had my phone set up, and I played him both recordings. I watched my grandson's face cycle through the same progression I'd expected, confusion first. Because the language is German, and he speaks approximately 10 words of it, then growing unease as he saw my expression, then the specific devastated look of someone hearing a suspicion confirmed that they'd been trying not to have. I translated as we listened. I kept my voice even and precise, the way I used to translate intercepts. When the second recording got to the part about the competitor's internal roadmap, Marcus went very still. "Grandpa," he said when it ended, "how do you speak German?" "Since 1974, I said. He stared at me for a long moment. "Why have I never known this?" "Because it wasn't something I needed you to know before now." I leaned forward. "Marcus, the second recording is not just a professional ethics issue. What he's describing in that call, sharing internal product roadmaps with a competitor, that's potentially a violation of your company's proprietary information agreements. Maybe federal law. This is larger than your proposal." My grandson sat with this for a moment. He has his grandmother's quality of going quiet when things are serious, of not filling the space with words before the thinking is done. Finally, he said, "What do we do?" "First thing tomorrow morning, you call your company's legal department directly, not HR legal. You explain that you have audio recordings of your SVP discussing the potential disclosure of proprietary information to a competitor. You let them make the determination about how to proceed. You don't go to Vogel. You don't discuss it with Preston or anyone on the immediate team. You go above, and you go directly. And what do we say about my proposal? About the way he's been?" "That comes with it," I said. "All of it comes with it. But the proprietary information issue gives you the standing to be taken seriously immediately. They can't minimize that the way they might try to minimize a complaint from a junior employee about a senior VP." Marcus looked at me in a way I don't have a precise description for, like he was seeing a version of me that he hadn't been introduced to yet. "Who are you?" he said. And then, quietly, I know who you are. But who were you?" "I was a soldier who was good at listening," I said. "Then I was an electrician who loved his wife and tried to be a good grandfather. Both things are true at the same time." Sunday morning, before the scheduled retreat activities, Marcus placed a call to Meridian's general counsel through the emergency contact line. I sat with him while he made it, and when the counsel asked to speak with the individual who had made the recordings, Marcus handed me the phone. I explained who I was, what I'd heard, how I'd heard it, and the nature of my background. I answered the questions directly and without embellishment. 40 years of making concise reports. The general counsel said, "Stay at the resort. Do not attend any further scheduled activities. We're sending someone." A senior attorney and 2 members of Meridian's internal security division arrived by mid-morning. They commandeered the resort's small conference room. Dieter Vogel was informed at 11:15 that there was an urgent legal matter requiring his presence. I understand from what Marcus was later told that Vogel initially attempted the posture of confident indignation, the settled executive surprised by unfounded allegations. That posture, according to the attorney Marcus spoke to afterward, lasted approximately 4 minutes until they played the recordings. Marcus and I sat in my room and waited. I made coffee using the small machine on the dresser. We talked about Eleanor, which was Marcus's idea. He asked me to tell him again about how she and I had met, the story he'd heard probably 30 times, and I told it again, and he listened the same way he listened as a small boy, with complete attention. That's one of the gifts Marcus has always had. He knows that the point of a story isn't always the information. Sometimes it's the telling. At 2 in the afternoon, Marcus received a call asking us both to come to the conference room. Around the table sat the attorney, the 2 security staff, and Meridian's chief operating officer, who had driven up from the city. Dieter Vogel was not in the room. I learned later that he had been escorted off the property by mid-morning, that his office had been secured, and that an investigation had already been initiated into the competitor contact he'd referenced in the second recording. His employment was terminated effective immediately, pending what the COO described as a more complete examination of his conduct. The COO, a sharp and direct woman named Margaret Reeves, looked at Marcus first. She said that Meridian owed him an apology and a debt, that the work attributed to Preston and presented to the executive team in October had been traced through document metadata and Marcus's archived drafts, clearly to Marcus's authorship, that this work would be properly credited, that the proposal would be advanced with Marcus leading it, and that his position was being elevated to senior infrastructure analyst, effective at the start of the next quarter, with the corresponding compensation adjustment. Marcus said thank you in a voice that was steady but thin, the way voices get when you've been holding something for a long time and someone finally lets you put it down. Then Margaret Reeves looked at me. "Mr. Walter," she said, "I'd like to understand more about your background if you're willing to share it." So I told them. The army, the assignments in Germany, the intelligence work, the languages. I told it the same way I've always told the things I'm allowed to tell directly, without drama, leaving out the parts that still aren't mine to discuss. I told them I'd come to the resort because my grandson asked me, and because something told me I should be there. Margaret Reeves was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "Mr. Vogel made a fundamental error in judgment. He looked at you and made a decision about who you were and what you were capable of based on what you had chosen to do with the years since your service. He paid for that error." She paused. "On behalf of this company, I want to say that we are grateful for what you did this weekend. Not just for Marcus, but for Meridian." I said that I appreciated that, and that I hoped they'd do right by the other young people in that division who'd likely had similar experiences with Vogel, even if they didn't have recordings. She said they would be looking into that carefully. Outside the conference room, in the hallway, Marcus hugged me in the way he hasn't since he was maybe 14 years old. Long, and without any of the self-consciousness that men usually bring to affection. He said, "Thank you, Grandpa. I don't have better words than that. Thank you." I held on to him for a moment and thought about Eleanor, about the prayer in my room Friday night, about the particular way God sometimes answers things by putting you in a parking lot at a resort in the Catskills, with a book and a recording device, and 40 years of language training you'd mostly forgotten you had. "You did the work," I told Marcus. "All I did was make sure it got to the right people." He shook his head. "That's the whole thing, though. That's everything." On the drive home, I stopped at a diner outside of Woodstock and ordered coffee and pie, and sat in a window booth, watching the last of the afternoon light come down through the maples. I thought about Dieter Vogel, not with satisfaction, exactly. I don't take pleasure in seeing anyone undone. But there was something that settled in me, a sense of correct proportion being restored that I think is different from pleasure. Justice doesn't feel good the way victory feels good. It feels quiet, like a level surface after a long time of walking on a slope. I thought about what he had assumed when he looked at me. An old man, someone's grandfather, a retired tradesman making conversation at a company retreat. The kind of person you're polite to because it costs you nothing and they'll soon be on their way. He had spoken freely in front of me with complete confidence, the way people speak in front of furniture. And I had let him believe what he believed right up until the moment it mattered. There's a temptation, when something like this happens, to feel that you've proven something, to want people to understand that you're more than you appear. I don't feel that way, particularly. Being understood has never been a priority of mine. Eleanor understood me. Marcus is beginning to. Frank DeLuca from the Army has always known roughly who I am. That's sufficient. What I feel is something closer to gratitude. That I had the skills when they were needed. That I was in the right place. That the years overseas, which I never entirely made peace with the distance from Eleanor, the work that existed in a moral gray, that I still sometimes lie awake thinking about those years, produced something that turned out to have a use I couldn't have anticipated when I was sitting in a facility near the east. German border, 24 years old and thinking mostly about going home. Marcus called me 3 days later. The internal review had turned up 4 other employees in Vogel's division, who had had similar experiences work incorporated without credit, false performance documentation being quietly assembled, careers being methodically undermined. The company had retained an outside firm to conduct a full investigation. Preston, who it turned out had known exactly whose work he was presenting, had been placed on administrative leave. Marcus had been asked to present his original proposal, the complete version, his version, to the executive team in January. "And they want you to come," Marcus said. "To the executive presentation?" "They want you there," Margaret Reeves specifically asked. I laughed. It surprised me. "I'm not sure an old electrician has much business in a corporate boardroom. Grandpa, you're the reason there's a presentation to give." He paused. "Please come." I went. I sat in the back of a conference room in a midtown Manhattan office tower and watched my grandson present 18 months of work to people who actually listened this time, who asked the right questions, who leaned forward when he talked. The proposal was approved. The project budget was allocated. Marcus will lead the Ohio Manufacturing Corridor expansion, which is projected to be one of the company's highest value infrastructure initiatives over the next 3 years. After the meeting, Margaret Reeves found me near the elevators. She shook my hand and said, "I meant what I said at the resort. We're grateful." I told her to take care of the other young people in that division. She said they were working on it. I believed her. I'm back in Binghamton now. The garden is put to bed for the winter. The football season is winding down, and Marcus comes up twice a month on weekends and eats my chili and argues with me about whether his team has any chance in the playoffs, which they don't, but I let him believe what he believes. He brought his girlfriend last time, a bright young woman from Buffalo who laughed at all the right moments and helped with the dishes without being asked. Eleanor would have approved. I think sometimes about what I would tell a younger version of myself, if that were possible. The 24-year-old in the facility near the East German border who was beginning to understand that skills can carry a cost, that the things you learn to do in service of something larger don't leave you when the service ends. I think I would tell him that the weight of it doesn't disappear, but it does, eventually, find a purpose. That the years of learning to sit still and listen and not react, the years of carrying knowledge quietly and waiting for the moment when it becomes useful, those years don't go to waste. They accumulate somewhere you can't always see, until a weekend in the Catskills when your grandson needs you to be more than his grandfather for a few days. I also speak Russian. I've mentioned that. And enough Arabic to follow the broad shape of a conversation. And some Polish, though it's rusty now. I keep them all exercised with books from the library and an occasional foreign film that I pause and rewind more often than most people would find comfortable. You never know. That's the truth of it. And it's not a lesson I'm delivering, it's just what experience looks like when you're finally old enough to see the whole of it. My neighbor Donna asked me last week what I'd been up to. I said, "Not much. Watched a little football. Drove down to the city to see Marcus. Ate some good pie in Woodstock on the way home." She said, "You're always so quiet, Walter. I never know what's going on in that head of yours." I smiled and said I was just an old retired electrician. Not much to report. She laughed and went back to her yard, and I went back to mine, and the November sky stretched out gray and wide over the rooftops of Binghamton, and somewhere in the city Marcus was at his desk, working on a project that has his name on it, and Eleanor's picture is on the mantel where I can see it from my chair, and I would not trade a single one of the years that made me exactly who I was on that porch, in the dark, listening to a man who had made the oldest and most expensive mistake in the book. He looked at something quiet and decided it was empty. He was wrong.